The Phantom Fleet of Ebony. What would you do if the biggest threat in the galaxy could not be seen? No, it's not invisibility, it's worse. It's like the very light itself refused to touch the Ebony Fleet, and we were fighting blind. The year is 2487. For 3 generations, humanity has been locked in a cold, brutal stalemate with the Xar'thos. They are not merely aliens, they are an enigma wrapped in absolute darkness. Every engagement, every battle report, every scream from a dying crew member pointed to the same terrifying truth: the Xar'thos only strike when the light dies. Imagine the deepest void you can think of. Now imagine an entire armada moving through it, undetected, unsung, until the moment their plasma beams tear through your hull. Our scientists called it a tactical solar anomaly. Our soldiers simply called them ghosts. I'm Elias Vance, and I wasn't a soldier. I was an engineer. I spent my life designing better lights, better sensors, better ways to see them. And all I ever did was fail. Until the day I realized that to defeat the darkness, you couldn't just turn on a bigger lamp. You had to understand why the darkness chose them. This isn't a war story about heroes with laser guns. This is a story about a hidden truth, a secret shielded by the very fabric of the cosmos, and how a single man with a wrench and a stubborn mind changed the course of galactic history by solving the ultimate light puzzle. The Xar'thos are not invisible. They are something far more terrifying. And the secret to their ebony fleet was not technology, it was desperation. The war had carved deep scars into the human spirit. The front line was the Perseus Veil, a massive, resource-rich nebula we desperately needed to control. But every time the human alliance fleet half pushed into the veil, the Xar'thos would emerge from the depths of black space, strike with surgical precision, and retreat before our heaviest cruisers could even lock a target. Our sensors were the best in the known universe: gravimetric, electromagnetic, thermal. We could track a micro-asteroid hurtling 50 light-years away. But the Xar'thos ships, massive dreadnoughts and nimble destroyers, registered as nothing but a null zone, a cold spot in the data. Our strategy became reactive, defensive, and ultimately, demoralizing. We were fighting a shadow war. Think of it, launching missiles at coordinates, hoping, praying, that something was there. And the Xar'thos knew it. They mastered the art of psychological warfare by doing absolutely nothing until the moment we were most exposed. My facility was deep within the orbital dockyards of Station Olympus. My team was tasked with developing the Vance Array, a hyperspectral sensor system designed to peel back the layers of whatever cloak the Xar'thos were using. We burned out millions of credits, hundreds of careers, and countless hours running simulations. The result was always the same: zero signal, zero trace, zero hope. The consensus among the top brass was clear: the Xar'thos had achieved universal light absorption, a theoretical technology capable of absorbing every photon, every wave, every particle interaction with their hull. It was science fiction made real, and it meant we had no way to track them. But engineers are stubborn. We don't believe in magic, only in complex mechanisms. And the universal light absorption theory had a flaw, a fatal contradiction that kept me awake for 4 years. It required impossible energy. To absorb every single wavelength of light and energy that hit a capital ship would require a power source that could rival a small sun. Where were they hiding that power? Why couldn't we detect the massive energy signature required to run the cloak? This single question was the loose thread I pulled. I started ignoring the massive sensor data and focused on the gaps, the missing information. I was looking for the technology that let the Qatar disappear. I should have been looking for the technology that allowed them to save energy. The Qatar are physically imposing, by the way. They are bipedal, standing nearly 3 meters tall, covered in a chitinous, obsidian-like armor. Their face is a complex mosaic of light-sensitive receptors, suggesting they navigate primarily through means other than visual light as we know it. But their ships were works of abstract, horrifying art, spiked, skeletal structures that seemed to defy conventional thrust and aerodynamics. They didn't glide, they slithered through the void. The breakthrough, the one that cost me my sanity and nearly my life, came during the analysis of the wreckage from the Battle of Cinder-12. A human destroyer, the Half-Redeemer, was annihilated. We recovered less than 1% of its mass. Among the debris was a tiny shard of Qatar hull material, no bigger than my thumb. It was inert, cold, and chemically indistinguishable from any carbon compound. My colleague, Dr. Anya Sharma, a brilliant exobiologist, ran a structural analysis. The results were initially dismissed as an error. The material, when exposed to high-energy radiation, exhibited a near-perfect reflection spectrum. It didn't absorb light, it repelled it. Wait, what? The entire Qatar fleet was famous for its total light absorption, and a piece of its hull was almost perfectly reflective. The generals threw the data out. They called it a contaminated sample. But I saw it as a clue. A contradiction of such magnitude that it had to be the key. I spent the next 6 months in the deepest levels of Olympus, surrounded by monitors, fueled by synthesized coffee, running the reflection data against every known physical law. The problem wasn't what the Qatar were doing. The problem was when they were doing it. I theorized that the Qatar cloak wasn't an active field absorbing light. It was a reactive photonic dispersal layer. It didn't absorb light, it bent it, scattered it, and moved it away from the point of impact, creating a temporary, localized null zone, a perfect shadow around the ship. But the light had to go somewhere. And that somewhere was the blinding light of the nearest star. The Qatar didn't attack in the darkness. They attacked in the glare. Think about it this way, when you drive into the sun, the glare blinds you to everything behind it. The Qatar had engineered a hull that could dramatically increase that glare, focusing all incident light and energy away from them and toward the human fleet's sensors, effectively blinding us with a flood of false positives and extreme interference. Their technology wasn't an absorber, it was a redirector. And this is where the Ebony Fleet part of the story begins. When the ship activated its dispersal layer, the light that was supposed to hit the ship was thrown out into the void, resulting in a shadow signature. It wasn't the ship itself that was invisible, it was the light around it that made us believe it was in darkness. But the theory was just a theory. I needed proof. And the only way to get proof was to go where no human had been and survived, the Qatar home system. I managed to convince Admiral Thorne, a grizzled veteran who had lost his own son to the Qatar, to authorize a completely off-the-books mission. Thorne didn't trust my physics, but he trusted my desperation. The plan was simple, and completely insane: use the stealthiest vessel we had, a relic from the pre-Qatar War, the Half-Whisper, a single-pilot reconnaissance craft, and equip it with a modified version of the Vance array. Instead of looking for what was hitting us, my array would be looking for the light that was being redirected. I wouldn't be looking for ships, I would be looking for shadows in the light. The Whisper was tiny, fast, and armed with exactly one experimental phase torpedo. My crew, just me, and the ship's ancient AI. Juno, whose programming was more philosophical than practical. Our target, Xar'thos, the supposed Qatar homeworld, a bleak, volcanic planet orbiting a dying red giant star, hundreds of light-years behind enemy lines. The journey was a blur of silence and anxiety. For 3 weeks, we danced through asteroid fields and navigated treacherous plasma streams, constantly hearing the chilling reports of Qatar strikes on the Alliance border. Every jump was a gamble. Every moment of silence felt like the universe was holding its breath. When we finally reached the Xar'thos system, the sight was breathtaking and terrifying. The red giant star bathed the planet in a perpetual, sickly twilight. Orbiting Xar'thos were massive, sprawling structures, the Qatar shipyards. And there, docked and motionless, was the Ebony Fleet. Dozens of capital ships, dark, menacing, and utterly devoid of reflection. I activated the new Vance array. The standard view showed the ships as perfectly dark silhouettes, but when I switched the array to my theoretical inversion mode, the mode designed to look for the redirected light, the monitors went wild. It wasn't darkness I saw. It was a blinding cascade of light thrown back toward the red sun. The Qatar were not dark, they were super brilliant on the side facing the star, using their hull to create a perfect environmental camouflage by generating the maximum possible glare and scattering it randomly. Their ships were effectively mirrors hiding behind a flashlight. The energy required wasn't impossible, it was simply harvested from the star they orbited. Their ships were constantly drinking solar energy, and their cloak was a massive, controlled reflection of that energy. It was an ingenious, elegant, and chilling solution to the problem of space warfare. They weren't hiding from the light, they were hiding in it. My jubilation lasted all of 30 seconds. A Qatar patrol, 3 fast scout vessels, broke from the main formation and began a sweep pattern, heading directly for the asteroid I was hiding behind. Juno, cloak report, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Affirmative, Engineer Vance. Standard thermal signature suppressed. However, the Qatar vessels are not using standard sensor sweeps. They appear to be listening. Juno's synthesized voice held a note of genuine confusion. Listening? What are they listening for? They are emitting a passive, low-frequency sonic ping. It is likely a form of local spatial awareness. They are not looking for light, they are looking for vibrations in the localized space-time. This was a critical detail the generals missed. The Qatar didn't rely on light sensors like us. They were like deep-sea creatures, navigating by sound and pressure, perfectly adapted to the silent void. The scouts were closing fast. I had to move, but a burst of my engines would give me away. My only option was a desperate, unproven maneuver. I instructed Juno to vent a burst of cryogenic plasma waste directly opposite the Qatar's path. The expanding, super cold cloud would create a momentary, localized disturbance in the space-time field of false echo. The three Qatar scouts immediately changed course, focusing their sonic pings on the plasma cloud. They were fooled. I used the distraction to execute a high-G micro-jump, moving the Whisper further into the shadow of a larger asteroid. We were safe, for now. My mission had been accomplished. I had confirmed the mechanism of the ebony cloak. I should have turned back. But the sight of the massive shipyard, the thousands of Qatar workers moving with silent, mechanical precision, felt too important to abandon. I steered the Whisper to a derelict Qatar supply platform, using the inversion mode to ensure my own minimal energy signature was absorbed by the surrounding solar glare. I needed to see more than their ships. I needed to see their civilization. I found an open access port likely for maintenance drones and used a shielded tether to dock. Donning a specialized atmospheric suit, I breached the platform's interior. What I found was not the triumphant fortress of a galactic superpower. It was a dying, utilitarian maintenance bay. The walls were cracked. There were massive, unaddressed coolant leaks. The air, thin and metallic smelling, was filled with the sounds of weary, rhythmic work, not bustling efficiency. And the Qatar themselves, they were not the imposing, obsidian-armored conquerors we imagined. The workers I saw were emaciated, their chitinous plates dull and chipped. They moved slowly, burdened by their own bulky suits. They looked tired. I came across a holographic schematic board, left active in a hurry. I pulled out my optical recorder and began translating the Qatar symbols using the established but limited lexicon we had. The translation was chilling. The Qatar weren't fighting for conquest. They were fighting for survival. Their home system, the Red Giant, was in its terminal phase a cosmic certainty. The intense, erratic solar flare activity was slowly poisoning Xar'thos. Their people were suffering from a genetic degradation linked to the specific spectrum of the dying star. The very star they used to power their invisible fleet was killing them. The ebony cloak wasn't a weapon of superiority. It was a desperate solution to a fundamental problem: energy. They needed massive amounts of solar energy to sustain their entire civilization, and the only place they could get it was from the dying star. They put that energy into the cloak not just to hide their ships, but to shield the ship's critical life support systems from the deadly radiation. The cloak was a giant life support regulator that also doubled as a defense mechanism. I had my proof, and a profound, tragic understanding of the enemy. The Qatar were not evil, they were simply facing extinction and viewed the Perseus Veil as their only viable replacement home. But I lingered too long. A heavy-duty maintenance drone, its sensors far superior to the scouts, registered my heat signature. An alarm blared, a low, mournful, grating sound that echoed through the vast bay. I sprinted back to the Whisper, my adrenaline spiking. Qatar guards, moving faster now, their weapons drawn, were converging on the dock. Juno, emergency jump sequence. I need 30 seconds. Negative, Engineer Vance. Engaging jump sequence now will subject the hull to catastrophic thermal stress. I don't care. Do it. As I sealed the hatch, the Qatar opened fire. The heavy sonic cannons hammered the hull of the Whisper. The ship bucked violently. Juno. One-phase torpedo. Target, the main solar collector on the shipyard's spire. Maximum power. But that is a non-military target, Vance. It will disable the entire energy grid for the sector. And the shipyard's life support. It's not about revenge, Juno, it's about blinding their command and control. Do it now. The experimental torpedo launched, a streak of purple light in the red twilight. It hit the massive collector spire with a deafening flash, tearing the structure apart. The sheer energy surge created a blinding pulse of light, completely overloading the Xar'thos sonic navigation system. In that split second of confusion, as the energy grid collapsed, the Whisper jumped. The jump was brutal. I blacked out. When I woke up, the Whisper was limping through friendly space, its hull severely compromised, but its core intact. I was hailed as a hero. The data from the Vance array inversion mode, proving the cloak's redirection nature, was invaluable. The Alliance immediately developed a new countermeasure, inverse spectrum targeting lasers ISDLs. Instead of looking for the ships, the ISDLs would lock onto the massive glare signature the cloak was generating and fire at the center of the shadow it created. But the real game changer was my recording of the Xar'thos shipyard. The revelation that the Xar'thos were dying, that their entire war was a desperate scramble for a new home, fundamentally shifted the narrative. The war was no longer about good versus evil, it was about two dying species competing for the last life raft. Admiral Thorne understood the political implications. He showed the data to the Alliance Council. The hardliners wanted to use the ISDLs to launch a decisive, genocidal strike. But the peace faction, seeing the tragedy in the Xar'thos eyes, argued for negotiation. The war didn't end with a bang. It ended with a whispered threat. The Alliance sent a transmission to the Xar'thos homeworld: "We know your secret. We know the cost of your cloak. We have the means to see you, and the means to destroy you. But we also know you're suffering. Stand down, and we will offer you a secure sector in the Perseus Vale, far from our established colonies, where your unique solar energy needs can be met without conflict." It took months. But the Xar'thos, their energy grid constantly failing due to my sabotage, and their strategic advantage erased by the ISDLs, had no choice. They accepted. The war ended, not because of a weapon, but because an engineer stopped looking at the weapon and started looking at the source of the darkness and found only a desperate, dying light. The peace is tenuous, filled with resentment and suspicion. But for the first time in 3 generations, the Ebony Fleet is visible, docked in a designated sector, no longer a phantom menace, but a solemn reminder of what happens when two species fight a war of pure survival. The story of the Xar'thos War is a brutal reminder: in the vast, cold universe, survival is the only true currency. We thought they were invincible because they were invisible. We were wrong. Their weakness was their incredible strength, their dependence on energy, the very thing that made their ships disappear. My job wasn't to fight, it was to look closer, to find the shadow in the light, the desperation behind the defiance. And what did we learn? That the biggest breakthroughs in human history often come not from better weapons, but from a deeper, more human understanding of the enemy. If this story, the story of Engineer Vance and the fragile peace forged from a desperate war, resonated with you, then you understand the core of great science fiction. Hit the like button if you think humanity's survival depends more on its engineers and scientists than its soldiers. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week, we break down high-impact stories, unearthing the human element in galaxy-spanning conflicts. You don't want to miss what we have planned next. Remember, the universe is terrifying, but it's also logical. Never let the mystery distract you from the mechanics. My name is Elias Vance. Stay curious. Stay sharp. And always, always look for the light that shouldn't be there.